All right, everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're heading down to West Palm Beach, Florida, for a case that shows just how fast a routine traffic stop can turn into a legal nightmare.
It starts out simple enough. A man gets pulled over for a traffic violation. Seems pretty standard, right?
Yeah, until you realize there's a young woman in the car and she seems, well, completely out of it.
Right, and that's where things get tricky.
Definitely raises some red flags for the officers. When you look at that body cam footage, what are those initial details that stand out to you? What makes them think, hold on, something's not right here?
It's the young woman's state, for sure. I mean, officers are trained to consider the worst case scenario. Could she be drugged? Is there something more serious going on? Their first priority is everyone's safety, so that observation really shifts the whole dynamic.
So how does that initial concern, that shift in focus, how does that actually escalate the situation for everyone involved?
Think about it this way. The officer's level of suspicion immediately goes up. They're not just checking a license and registration anymore. They're trying to figure out if a crime has been committed. And that impacts their questions, their tone, their whole approach. It's a totally different ballgame now.
And that change in approach can have some serious legal implications, especially in Florida.
Huh.
You've got statutes like 784.072B, which deals with felony battery on a law enforcement officer, and 843.01, resisting an officer with violence.
Exactly. Even what might seem like a minor act of resistance, like arguing with an officer or trying to walk away, could suddenly become a felony charge in this situation. And then you add in the fact that later on, the young woman admits to being underage and drinking, and the potential consequences just multiply for everyone involved.
So let's break this down for our listeners, because there's some serious takeaways here. For anyone over 30, think about this. Who are you with? How would their behavior look to an officer during a traffic stop? Because perception matters.
Absolutely. And for the younger folks out there, this is a stark reminder that underage drinking isn't just a slap on the wrist. It can have a ripple effect, snowballing into something much bigger and impacting not only you, but the people around you.
This case is like a crash course in what not to do during a police interaction. Misunderstandings happen on both sides, and things can spiral out of control so quickly.
Which brings us to a crucial part of how the legal system tries to make sense of these situations, these misunderstandings, evidentiary standards. Understanding these different levels is key to understanding how officers assess situations and what justifies their actions.
Okay, so let's walk through each of these 6 standards one by one. We'll use our West Palm Beach case as a real-world example, starting with mere suspicion and going all the way up to beyond a reasonable doubt. Where do we even begin?
Well, we start with that gut feeling, that mere suspicion. It's not based on hard facts, just a sense that something's off. Like in our case, the officer sees the young woman, her state, and it just triggers his spidey senses. Now, that alone isn't enough for any legal action, but it's a starting point.
So what bumps it up from a hunch to reasonable suspicion, which actually allows an officer to detain someone?
Now we need specific, observable facts that point towards potential criminal activity. It's more than just a feeling. There has to be something concrete.
So in our case, it was the young woman being unresponsive, the driver's nervousness, the whole vibe of the situation. That combination gave the officers a reasonable basis for digging deeper.
Exactly. And those additional questions led to the young woman admitting she'd been drinking underage. Boom, now we've got probable cause. That's the level needed for an arrest or search warrant, because there's a reasonable belief that a crime has been committed.
So probable cause is a major turning point in any encounter with law enforcement because it significantly changes the rules of the game. But what about preponderance of the evidence? That sounds pretty straightforward, right?
It does, but there's a catch. Preponderance is mainly used in civil cases, not criminal ones. It basically means something is more likely than not to be true, a lower bar than beyond a reasonable doubt, which is what we need for a criminal conviction.
So if there were a civil lawsuit against the driver, say for causing the young woman's intoxication, the evidence just needs to tip the scale slightly in favor of the claim. 51% certainty is enough.
Precisely. And while preponderance wasn't the focus of our traffic stop, it highlights how the type of case, civil versus criminal, dramatically affects the level of proof required.
All right, so we've covered mere suspicion, reasonable suspicion, and probable cause, the standards that dictated the traffic stop itself. But we still have 3 more levels to unpack, and that's where things get really interesting.
Welcome back.
It's wild, right? Just one case, and it opens up so many layers of the legal system.
It really does.
We've talked about those red flags, how the officer's suspicion grows, those specific Florida laws that come into play. But I gotta say, knowing those evidentiary standards, it's like I'm seeing the whole traffic stop in a new light.
Like you're right there with the officers trying to figure out what to do, how to handle it.
Exactly. Okay, so last time we talked about what could have happened, legally speaking. But let's go back to that body cam footage. What
Yeah.
actually went down?
Well, you can see right away that officers are being cautious as they approach the car.
Oh, yeah,
And then they see the young woman, boom, that mere suspicion kicks in. Something's off.
definitely. You can tell the driver's nervous, which probably doesn't help. And the questions start coming. Who's she? How much has she had to drink? What's going on here?
And remember, they're working their way up that ladder of suspicion, mere suspicion,
Right.
to reasonable suspicion. They need more than just a hunch to detain him, to investigate further.
And they get it pretty quickly. The young woman admits she's only 20, underage for drinking in Florida, of course.
Yep.
And she's had, well, more than a few drinks by her own admission.
And that's the game changer.
Right.
Her age, what she's saying, bam, probable cause.
They've got a reason to believe a crime has been committed, underage drinking. Legally, they could take action.
They could.
But, and this is what I find so interesting, they didn't.
Mm.
Even with that probable cause to arrest her, they chose a different path.
It's about discretion. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
sometimes arrest isn't the answer. There are other ways to handle a situation.
And they focused on her safety. They called for medical help to make sure she was okay. Even contacted her parents to come get her.
It's a good reminder that things don't always have to escalate with the police. Sometimes it's about getting people the help they need,
I agree.
finding a peaceful solution.
Absolutely. But that doesn't mean the driver got off scot-free. They gave him citations for traffic violations, including driving with a suspended license.
And those citations matter. Oh, yeah. They matter because even though the young woman wasn't arrested, this whole encounter could come back to haunt both of them.
Wait, what do you mean? How could this come back to bite them later on?
Well, for the young woman, this is on her record now. It could come up in future interactions with law enforcement, maybe even during background checks for jobs or licenses. It's a reminder that these things can have a lasting impact.
Wow. I hadn't thought about that.
And for the driver, those citations add up. Driving with a suspended license, that can mean bigger fines, higher insurance premiums, even losing his license altogether.
So even though nobody ended up in jail, this whole traffic stop is a wake-up call.
Oh,
It shows how the choices we make can have consequences we don't even think about.
absolutely.
And it brings us back to those evidentiary standards. We still have a few more to discuss. Clear and convincing evidence and beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah, those come up less often in your average encounter with the police, but they're crucial for understanding how the system determines whether someone's guilty or innocent.
Okay, so clear and convincing evidence. Where does that fit in?
Think of it as a step up from preponderance of the evidence. It requires more certainty, but not quite as much as beyond a reasonable doubt. We see it in cases involving things like parental rights or fraud.
So let's say, in our case, the driver was accused of knowingly giving the young woman alcohol. To prove that in certain legal proceedings, they'd need clear and convincing evidence.
Right. It has to be highly probable, but not absolutely certain.
Got it. And then there's the big one, the gold standard, beyond a reasonable doubt.
The highest standard we have. The one that has to be met to convict someone of a crime.
So imagine the driver is charged with contributing to the delinquency of a minor. That's a serious charge. To find him guilty, they'd have to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt.
Exactly. Meaning the evidence is so strong, so convincing, that there's basically no other explanation that makes sense.
No other way to look at it.
Yeah.
Okay, so even though this whole case was handled in a way that focused on safety and compassion, it really shows how even a seemingly small encounter with the law can have big consequences.
Absolutely.
And it highlights how important it is to know your rights, to understand how the system works at every level.
Couldn't agree more.
And we are back for the final part of our deep dive. Man, we've covered a lot of ground, from a traffic stop in West Palm Beach all the way to beyond a reasonable doubt.
It really is remarkable how much we can learn from just one case, isn't it? We've talked about those split-second decisions, the role of discretion, the importance of knowing those evidentiary standards.
It's been eye-opening, for sure. But now I kind of want to zoom out a little. What does this whole case tell us about the bigger picture, about society, about how we view law enforcement?
I think this case really underscores the need for better communication, more understanding between law enforcement and the community.
There's so much tension sometimes, right? So
Yeah.
much mistrust on both sides. You see it everywhere.
And cases like this one, where the officers chose to de-escalate, to focus on helping, it can go a long way towards building that trust. It shows that law enforcement isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about problem solving.
But it's a two-way street, right? We can't expect things to go smoothly if we approach every interaction with the police like it's a confrontation.
Exactly. Open communication, honesty, staying calm, those things can de-escalate a situation and help everyone find some common ground.
You know, this case also got me thinking about the role of alcohol in our society. It seems like it's a factor in so many situations that end up going sideways.
It's a tough one. Alcohol's so embedded in our culture, but it can cloud judgment, lead to risky behavior, sometimes even criminal activity.
And when you mix alcohol and young people, like we saw in this case, the chances of things going wrong just skyrocket.
Definitely. And it highlights why we need to have those tough conversations about responsible drinking, about the risks involved.
So where do we go from here? What can our listeners do to be more informed, more responsible citizens?
Well, first and foremost, educate yourselves. Know your rights. Understand the law. Stay informed about issues related to law enforcement and the justice system.
Don't just take things at face value. Go deeper. Consider different perspectives.
Exactly. Get involved in your community. Attend those town halls. Participate in local initiatives. Talk to your friends and family about these issues.
Support those organizations working to improve police-community relations. The ones promoting responsible drinking, advocating for a fairer justice system.
And never forget, change starts with us. The choices we make, how we treat each other, how we engage with the legal system, it all adds up.
Well said. That about wraps up our deep dive into this case from West Palm Beach. It's been a journey. We've explored the law, human behavior, the choices we make, and the consequences that follow.
It's been a pleasure unpacking these complex issues with you. And remember, knowledge is power. The more we know, the better equipped we are to navigate whatever life throws at us.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks for joining us on Justice, Just Us in the Room. We'll be back next week with another deep dive and a new case, a new set of challenges. Until then, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay